Below the cliffs of Normandy, near the American cemetery, lies a piece of broken concrete, once part of a German fortification. Today, it's known as Ray's Rock. On June 6, 1944, amidst the chaos of Omaha Beach, Staff Sergeant Ray Lambert used it as cover while saving countless lives. This is the story of a medic who defied human limits, charging into the chaos again and again, dragging the wounded to safety as bullets screamed past and the tide threatened to consume them all. It's a story of courage, sacrifice, and survival on the longest day of his life. The wind off the English Channel carried the scent of salt and diesel fuel. The deck of the transport ship rumbled beneath Ray Lambert's boots as he paced, scanning the faces of his men. Some whispered prayers. The invasion was minutes away, and fear had settled over them like a thick fog. Ray wasn't a stranger to war. North Africa, Sicily. He had patched up men under fire, dragged wounded out of burning vehicles, held dying soldiers' hands as they took their final breath. He knew what was waiting for them on that stretch of sand in France. Ray and his younger brother Bill both served in the 16th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division, famously known as the Big Red One. Bill was somewhere nearby, in another landing craft. They hadn't spoken since loading onto the ships. Ray had wanted to find him, to exchange one last word before the landing, but orders were orders. Each man had his place in this operation. Bill had his, Ray had his. Now, packed into the Higgins boat with the first wave, Ray braced himself as they surged toward the easy red sector of Omaha Beach. He glanced down at his hands, strong hands, steady hands. Hands that had saved lives, stitched wounds, and comforted men who had lost too much blood to survive. But they weren't magic. No amount of training could stop the bullets already waiting for them on that shore. An officer called for final checks. Ray adjusted his helmet and glanced at his medics. Stay low, work fast, don't stop unless you have to. It was all he could say. A single thought ran through his mind: get to the wounded, no matter what. The ramp slammed down. Hell opened up. Gunfire erupted, ripping into the men charging down the ramp. Ray didn't hesitate. He jumped off the side of the ramp, plunging into the freezing surf as bullets shredded the space he had just occupied. The shock of the cold punched the air from his lungs. Water surged up his chest, dragging at his gear, but his boots hit the seabed. The sand shifted beneath him, unstable, but he was still on his feet. That was more than he could say for some of the others. Machine gun fire shredded the waves, rounds ripping through the water and cutting down men before they could even reach the shore. Mortar blasts churned the surf, sending towering geysers of seawater and smoke into the air. The roar of the landing craft's engines had masked the battle's fury, but now he heard everything. Screams, explosions, the mechanical chatter of MG-42s. It wasn't just sound, it was a physical thing, shaking his skull, rattling his ribs, pressing against his chest like an unseen force trying to drive him under. Something struck his elbow hard. He glanced down, badly torn, bleeding, but strangely, no pain. Probably shrapnel, no time to think about it. He clenched his jaw and kept moving. The beach was still 100 feet away. Bullets stitched the water around him, kicking up sprays. Men floundered, struggling against waves and weighty gear. Some never surfaced again. Ray dropped into a depression in the seabed, sinking almost to his shoulders. For a brief second, it felt safer there, hidden below the surface. Then he saw a body floating nearby, face down, motionless. He reached for the man, turned him over. The soldier's eyes were open, glassy, already gone. Ray let go. There were others he could still save. He forced himself forward, every step an effort against the pull of the tide and the weight of his gear. The beach was a graveyard of men and metal. Landing craft, some burning, some half-submerged, littered the shoreline. Bodies drifted in the shallows or lay twisted in the sand, their lifeblood mixing with the tide. The engineers hadn't cleared a path. The beach obstacles were still there, twisted iron, jagged hedgehog, barbed wire waiting beneath the waterline to snare men like fish in a net. A wave crashed over his head. He staggered, coughing out seawater, wiping stinging salt from his eyes. He could see the slope of the beach now, just ahead. A shout rose behind him. Ray turned. A soldier was struggling, waves rolling over his head. He was drowning. Ray moved without thinking. He fought his way back, water rushing past his chest, his bad arms screaming with every motion. The soldier wasn't just struggling, he was caught. Barbed wire. The man's pack had snagged on it, trapping him in place. Each wave drove him under, the sea trying to claim him. Ray dove. The salt burned his eyes as he fumbled for the straps. He yanked. Nothing. The pack was stuck fast, back to the surface. A gasp of air. Another dive. A puzzle to solve. This time he went for the man's life preserver, unbuckling the straps, peeling it away. The soldier kicked, his body finally breaking free. Ray grabbed his arm, pulling him up. "Get to shore," he gasped. "Find a gun, find your company." The man didn't hesitate. He staggered forward, joining the others crawling toward the sand. Ray turned back. Who else could he save? Bullets whipped past, snapping into the water. Mortars thudded against the sand. The tide carried more bodies, some moving, some not. Ray pressed forward. His boots hit solid ground. He was finally on Omaha Beach. The sand beneath Ray Lambert's boots was firm but uneven, pitted with craters and scattered with debris. He stumbled, catching himself on the wet ground, fingers pressing into the mix of seawater and sand. The air pounded with the crash of waves, the crack of rifle fire, and the deep thud of mortars. All around him, men pushed forward, some staggering, some falling, some never got back up. The German machine guns had the landing zone bracketed perfectly. Every time a man moved, another fell. The engineers hadn't been able to blast the beach obstacles clear, and the surf still churned around twisted metal hedgehogs, barbed wire, and the wreckage of destroyed landing craft. Explosions sent sheets of water and sand skyward, geysers of fire and debris blotting out the early morning sun. Ray ducked into a shallow crater just above the waterline, his breath coming hard. He stole a glance over his shoulder, more landing craft coming in, more men pouring onto the beach, stepping straight into the same death trap he had just survived. A body drifted in the tide a few feet away. He crawled toward it. His fingers found the man's collar, pulling him closer. He turned him over. No breath, no movement. The soldier was already gone. Ray let go. There was nothing he could do for him. He turned toward the higher ground, where the slope of the beach offered a sliver of hope. Men were trying to run, trying to escape the killing zone, but the weight of their gear in the surf made every step a struggle. Some staggered, their arms clutched around wounds. Others crawled. The lucky ones made it to the nearest cover, a row of beach obstacles and a few scattered craters. Ray pushed forward. Then he heard it, a panicked, gasping cry. Ray turned, scanning the water. A soldier floundered just beyond the breakers, arms thrashing as waves crashed over his head. He wasn't swimming, he was sinking. Ray lunged back into the surf. Reaching the man, he grabbed hold of his collar, but the soldier's wild panic nearly pulled them both under. His hands clawed at Ray's shoulders, desperate for something solid. "Stop fighting," Ray barked, shaking him. "I've got you." The soldier stilled, just enough for Ray to hook an arm around his chest and start dragging him toward shore. The waves fought back, pushing them under, but Ray kicked hard, pulling them through the water inch by inch. His muscles burned, his wounded elbow throbbed. Finally, his boots hit firmer sand. He hauled the soldier onto the beach and dropped beside him, chest heaving. The man coughed, trying to sit up. "You good?" Ray asked, already scanning for the next man who needed him. The soldier nodded, dazed but breathing. Ray pushed himself to his feet. There were more out there. He turned back toward the waves. He went back in. One by one, he pulled men to shore, some walking, some limping, some barely conscious. His hands worked on autopilot, bandaging wounds, stopping bleeding, giving men the only thing they needed to keep going, a chance. The problem was, once they got to shore, they were still trapped in the open. The Germans had the beach zeroed in. Wounded men made easy targets, huddled at the waterline, unable to move farther. And if the bullets didn't kill them, the tide would. Ray spotted what looked like a rock, a dark shape jutting out of the sand, wide enough to offer some protection. He half ran, half crawled toward it, dragging a wounded soldier behind him. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't a rock. It was concrete, some kind of German fortification, maybe a broken-off piece of a bunker. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that it was big enough to be used as cover. He reached it, pulled the soldier in beside him. He pressed his back against the concrete slab, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It was a godsend, about 7 feet wide, 4 feet high, the only real cover he had seen on this beach. He glanced at the wounded soldier he had dragged there. The man was shaking, bleeding from a gut wound. "You're gonna be okay," Ray lied. He pulled out a morphine syringe, jabbed it into the man's arm, and moved on. The man would last a little longer, but if they didn't get off this beach soon, none of them would. A new wave of landing craft was coming in, their engines roaring as they plowed through the surf. Ray turned toward the water. Men were still struggling, still drowning, still dying before they could even get a foothold in the sand. He hadn't expected to spend most of his time in the surf, but he knew what he had to do. He went back in. The water was thick with bodies, some floating, some thrashing against the tide. He reached the first man, a young soldier, barely more than a kid, eyes wide with panic. Ray grabbed him, pulled him toward shore. Machine gun fire ripped into the waves around them, bullets zipping past his head. He didn't stop. He got the soldier to the rock, then turned back. Another man, this one clutching a mangled arm, trying to push himself toward shore with his good hand. Ray hauled him up, half carrying, half dragging him. The man groaned in pain. "Keep moving," Ray urged. "You're almost there." He deposited him behind the concrete barrier, then went back again. The pattern repeated. Dive in, pull a man out, bandage him, move on. Time blurred. He didn't count how many he saved. He just kept going. Then something changed. The concrete barrier was drawing attention. The Germans had noticed men gathering behind it. Machine guns shifted their aim. Bullets chewed into the sand nearby. A mortar shell struck just short of the rock, sending up a geyser of fire and sand. Ray hit the ground. When the blast cleared, he looked back. The men behind the barrier were still alive, but the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Only those directly behind the slab had cover. It wasn't big enough for everyone. The machine guns didn't stop. Another mortar landed closer, shaking the earth. Ray gritted his teeth. He had to keep moving. Another landing craft was coming in, bringing more men into the slaughter. Ray steadied himself. Time to go back in. Ray Lambert's body screamed for rest, but he pushed forward, back into the chaos. More landing craft had reached the shore, spewing fresh waves of soldiers into the killing zone. Many didn't even make it off the ramps before German machine guns found them. Others staggered into the surf, already wounded, gasping as the tide swallowed them. Ray waded in. He reached the first man, a soldier gripping his leg, blood coming from a wound above his knee. Ray dropped beside him, yanked a bandage from his kit, and wrapped it tight. "You're good," Ray said, not sure if it was true. "Get to cover." The man nodded weakly and crawled forward. Another man was on his back nearby, staring at the sky, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Ray knelt beside him, a stomach wound. Nothing he could do except dull the pain. He pulled out a morphine syringe and pressed it into the man's arm. The soldier's eyes met his. "Am I going to be okay?" he asked. Ray forced a smile. "Yeah, you'll be fine." It was a lie, but what else could he say? A fresh explosion sent a blast of sand and shrapnel tearing across the beach. Ray felt the impact, like a hammer striking his left thigh behind and above his knee. His leg buckled, and he hit the ground hard. He gritted his teeth and reached down. Blood soaked through his fatigues. A bad wound, but not enough to stop him. He forced himself up. More men were struggling to shore, more wounded collapsing just past the waterline. The concrete slab was still the only cover. The problem was getting men there before they were cut down. Ray grabbed another soldier, this one barely able to move. He hooked an arm under his shoulder and half-dragged him across the beach. Every step was agony. His thigh burned, his elbow throbbed, but he kept going. Somehow, they made it. He set the man down behind the slab, then turned to look for more. That's when he saw Ray Lepore. Lepore, one of his fellow medics, was crouched over a wounded soldier, pressing a bandage to the man's chest. Blood soaked through the fabric. Ray limped toward him. "Lepore, you may have to take over if I—" A single shot cracked through the air. Lepore's head snapped back. His body slumped sideways. Ray froze. A sniper. For the first time since the ramp had dropped, something deeper than exhaustion or pain hit him. Despair. He had been on beaches before. He had seen men die before. But this was different. Lepore had been saving a life when his was taken. Ray clenched his fists. The noise, the carnage, the senselessness of it all pressed down on him like the weight of the ocean. Then somewhere deep in his bones, the feeling passed. This was his job. This was what he was meant to do. He took a breath, forced himself to look away from Lepore's body, and turned back to the sea. The fourth wave was landing. More men needed him. He wasn't done yet. Ray Lambert moved like a man possessed. Pain, exhaustion, and grief no longer mattered. Only the next man he could save. More landing craft slammed into the beach, their ramps dropping into the bloodied surf. The same pattern repeated. Men poured out. German machine guns ripped through them. Mortar blasts threw bodies into the air. Some made it to cover. Too many didn't. Ray pulled another soldier toward the concrete slab, the closest thing to protection they had. He barely registered the weight anymore. His body operated on instinct, ignoring the burning in his thigh, the searing pain in his elbow, the dull ache of every muscle stretched beyond its limit. As he reached the slab, he caught his breath for a moment and glanced up the beach. His eyes swept the carnage. Wrecked landing craft, the dying and the dead, the brutal slaughter of young men trying to claw their way up the sand. Then he saw the wreckage of a boat farther down the shore, what was left of it. A pang of fear shot through him. He knew what section his brother Bill had landed in. That craft, the one torn apart, men scattered in the surf, no survivors moving, was only a couple 100 yards away from where Bill's unit was supposed to land. Ray's stomach twisted. He had spent the morning pulling strangers out of the water, patching up men he barely knew. But this was his brother. A part of him wanted to charge down the beach, to search the bodies, to look for Bill among the wreckage. But another part of him, the part that had been hardened by war, told him to keep working. There were still men alive in front of him, his fists clenched. He had to make a choice. Then another soldier cried out behind him, dragging himself toward the concrete slab. Blood poured from a wound in his side. Ray moved without thinking. He grabbed the soldier, pulled him in, and tore open his kit. His hands worked on their own, pressing a bandage against the wound, stopping the bleeding, giving the man just enough of a chance to keep moving. But his mind was elsewhere. Bill had landed in the 16th Infantry Regiment, further down the beach. If he was in that destroyed landing craft, he was gone. If he had somehow survived, he could be just as torn up as the men Ray was saving now. What seemed like hours passed in a haze. Ray kept moving. More wounded needed help. More men called out for a medic. He never stopped. Ray Lambert had lost count of how many men he had pulled from the surf. He no longer felt the cold of the water, the burn of his wounds, or the crushing weight of exhaustion. The only thing that mattered was the next soldier, the next man struggling, bleeding, drowning. The fourth wave had landed, and just like the others, it had walked straight into a massacre. The Germans still held the high ground, still raked the beach with unrelenting fire. But more Americans were pushing forward now, pressing into the dunes, starting to silence some of the guns. Ray forced himself toward the water. He reached a man just as a wave crashed over them both. Ray hooked an arm under the soldier's shoulder and started dragging him to shore. Then the world went dark. Something massive slammed down on them. The impact drove Ray under, the weight crushing his chest, pressing him into the sand. For a terrifying second, he didn't understand what had happened. Then he realized. A landing craft had come in directly on top of them. The ramp had dropped right onto them. Ray couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The water churned around him, salty and metallic with blood. His lungs screamed for air, but the pressure pinned him against the seabed. This is it, he thought. This is how I die. A strange calm settled over him. He had spent the last few hours saving others. Now there was no one left to save him. His grip loosened on the wounded soldier beside him. The weight of the ramp pressed harder. Then, inexplicably, the landing craft door lifted. One moment he had been drowning. The next, he was floating, rising toward the surface. He broke through, sucking in air like a man starved for breath. The wounded soldier was still there, barely conscious. Ray grabbed him again and fought his way toward the beach. His legs barely worked. Every step felt like dragging a dead weight through quicksand. He could barely hear over the ringing in his skull. Finally, his boots hit dry sand. He stumbled forward. His medics, his men rushed to him. "I can't go anymore," Ray muttered. Then the world went black. It was time for Ray Lambert to be helped. Ray drifted in and out of consciousness. The battle raged on without him, the sounds of war now distant, muffled, as though coming from another world. When his eyes fluttered open, he felt the warmth of the sun on his face, its rays breaking through the clouds and drifting smoke. He wasn't on the beach anymore. Beneath him, the deck of an LCT rocked gently with the tide. He was alive, out of danger. For a fleeting moment, he thought it was a dream, that he was waking from a nightmare. But then the pain hit, a deep, relentless throb in his thigh, a dull ache in his elbow, a sharp stab in his back. He didn't know it yet, but the ramp of the landing craft that had slammed into him had cracked vertebrae. The sheer weight of exhaustion pressing down on him confirmed what his body already knew. It had all been real. A doctor moved between the wounded, checking dog tags, making notes. Ray felt hands on his chest, fingers pressing against his neck to check for a pulse. "Lambert," the doctor muttered. He hesitated. "There's another Lambert on board." Ray's heart seized. "Bill?" His voice barely carried over the groans of the wounded. The doctor didn't answer right away. That pause told Ray everything he needed to know. "He's alive," the doctor said finally. "But he's bad. Might lose an arm and a leg." Ray's head swam. Omaha had taken so much, his friends, his strength, nearly his life. But Bill, his brother, he couldn't lose him too. "No," Ray rasped, his voice hoarse but firm. "Find a way to save his arm. save his leg. Bill wasn't there to speak for himself, so Ray would advocate for him, because if their positions were reversed, Bill would be doing the same. The doctor gave him a long look but said nothing. Ray let himself collapse back onto the deck, his energy spent. The boat rocked gently beneath him, the sea lapping against the hull. The sun was rising higher in the sky, its warmth a stark contrast to the hell they had just escaped. He had survived. Bill had survived. But how many others had not? As the ship left Normandy behind, Ray let exhaustion take him. His war wasn't over. But for now, he closed his eyes and let the darkness pull him under. Hours blurred into a haze of pain and exhaustion. At some point, medics came for him, lifting him onto a stretcher and carrying him off the LCT. The world swayed as they moved, his vision narrowing to flashes of sky, faces, and the distant rumble of engines. Then, the jolt of being loaded into an ambulance, and there, Bill Ray barely registered anything else. His brother lay beside him, pale, his uniform cut away, his body wrapped in blood-stained bandages. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths, his face drawn tight with pain. Ray reached out, gripping Bill's uninjured hand. Bill stirred, eyes fluttering open. He blinked, unfocused at first, then his gaze locked onto Ray. "Hey," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. Ray let out a breath, a smile tugging at the edges of his exhaustion. "Took you long enough to find me." Bill exhaled something like a laugh, wincing from the effort. "Next time, let's pick somewhere easier." Ray shook his head, chuckling despite everything. Yeah, next time. They had survived, barely, but for now they were together. Years later, Ray Lambert sat in the warm sunlight of a quiet morning, his hands resting on his lap. They were older now, veined, calloused, the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime healing others. But no matter how many years passed, they still carried the weight of that day. He had lived long enough to see the world move on. He and his wife raised a family, built a life beyond the war. But no matter how far he traveled, no matter how many peaceful mornings like this one he was granted, Normandy never left him. He still thought about the men he had pulled from the surf, the ones who had gripped his arm and begged for help. He still wondered how many had lived. At division reunions, he sometimes scanned the faces of the men around him, searching for someone, anyone, he had saved that day, but he never recognized a single one. Had they survived the war? Had they gone home, married, had children? Had they carried on, like him, with the invisible weight of that day pressing on their shoulders? And then there was the ramp, the steel door of the landing craft that had crushed him beneath the water, sealing him in what should have been his grave. He had never found an answer for why it had lifted. Maybe the tide had shifted. Maybe a stray bullet had hit a mechanism at the right time. Maybe it had just been dumb luck. Or maybe someone, had decided that Ray Lambert wasn't meant to die that day. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair, letting the warmth of the sun press against his face. It had been a long life, a full life. 75 years later, Ray Lambert returned to Normandy. The beach was quiet now, the roar of war replaced by the steady crash of waves. He stood near the rock that had sheltered him on that brutal day, Ray's Rock they called it now, and remembered. Honored by a president, saluted by soldiers, he was hailed as a hero. But as he looked out over the sand, he thought only of the men who never made it home.